The Triassic was a time when many parts of the world were arid and dry. One such region that comes to mind is what we now call the American Southwest. However, not all of the land masses that contained these environments were connected. And if we zoom in on the area that would become part of North America's eastern seaboard, specifically what is now the state of North Carolina, we can see that this location was likely much wetter. And it just so happened to have one very special inhabitant, the Carnufex carolinensis, or the Carolina butcher. Carnufex carolinensis was first discovered in the 1970s by paleontologist Stanley E. Ceratops at Ghost Ranch, New Mexico. But due to its age and location, the species was actually referred to Carnufex for another 40 years until its own species was finally recognized in 2010. The genus Carnutex itself was named by German paleontologist Johann Andreas von Bencken in 1836. This genus contains a number of species which have been found in Germany, Switzerland, France, Italy, Spain, the Czech Republic, Brazil, Argentina, and North Carolina. As mentioned before, the specific species was finally named carolinensis in 2010, and this was done to honor the state of North Carolina where the fossil was first discovered. The name translates to Carolina butcher. But what did Carnutex look like, and how did it live? In life? To answer this question, let's start with the skull, which is our most complete. We can see that Carnutex had long, slender jaws lined with sharp teeth for catching and slicing up prey. Its head was also narrow, pointed, and distinctly long, a trait shared among other members of its family, the Carnufexidae. Now, unlike many of its relatives, Carnufex had no distinct bony plates or osteoderms on its skull. It also lacked the typical rounded, bulky shape that other members of the group possessed. Instead, Carnutex had a sleek, streamlined skull that would have been well suited for an ambush hunting lifestyle. The body of Carnutex was equally distinctive. It was small to medium-sized, measuring around 3 meters in length and weighing about 300 kilograms. Unlike other Carno family members, Carnutex was not particularly robust, and instead had a relatively slender build. Also, its forelimbs were shorter than the hind limbs, giving it a dog-like stance rather than the sprawling posture of most crocodilians. Lastly, its tail was long and whip-like, providing both balance and propulsion when swimming. These physical characteristics show us that Carnufex was built for speed and agility, suggesting that it was an active predator that relied on chasing down prey. Now, while this may sound familiar to modern crocodilians, keep in mind that the crocodilians themselves had not yet evolved. That's because Carnutex lived almost 231 million years ago during the Triassic period, long before the emergence of crocodiles and alligators. In fact, Carnufex was a member of an ancient group of reptiles called archosaurs, and within that group, they were part of a lineage known as crocodilian precursors or crurotarsans. While technically not being a crocodilian themselves, their anatomy gives us valuable insight into the evolutionary transition from early crocodilians to the modern forms we know today. So, how exactly are they related to crocodiles? Well, it turns out that crocodilians make up only a small portion of the crocodilian precursor group. Early crocodilians were large, robust-bodied archosaurs with long, powerful tails and short legs. They belonged to a group called the pseudotsuchians, but this group eventually gave way to the smaller, more derived sphenotsuchians. These were better adapted to life in fast-flowing streams and rivers. Sphenotsuchians would go on to give rise to the later crocodylomorphs, which include true crocodilians, dinosaurs, birds, and of course, Carnufex. So basically, Carnutex is quite important in the story of crocodilian evolution. However, the exact nature of this relationship has been difficult to determine due to the scarcity of well-preserved crocodilian fossils. The oldest crocodilian fossils come from the Middle Triassic epoch, roughly 247 million years ago. But the radiation of the crocodilian group is thought to have taken place during the late Triassic. Unfortunately, the fossils we have don't tell us much about the ecology and behavior of these animals. Most of them are either too incomplete or come from sites without much associated paleo-environmental data. Because of this, we don't really know what sort of environment crocodilians preferred or how they spent their time. However, evidence suggests that there was significant diversity in their habitats and behaviors. For example, some were fully aquatic, while others were more terrestrial. Some may have hunted birds, while others preferred fish. And some were probably scavengers. But back to Carnufex. The thing is, there isn't any direct evidence showing what the Carolina butcher's ecological role was, and honestly, it's hard to say if it was even an apex predator because that term implies that it was the top predator in its ecosystem, which may not have been the case. If this title had existed back then, it might have gone to a different animal entirely. Unfortunately, until we find more fossils, we may never know for sure. But luckily, we do have a good idea of what it ate based on its close relative, the Brazilian Carnufex. This species lived in what is now southern Brazil during the late Triassic, and was likely very similar to Carnufex carolinensis in terms of both appearance and behavior. Scientists believe that the Brazilian Carnufex was carnivorous and had a diet that consisted mainly of amphibians and early relatives of mammals. And given that these two Carnufex species lived in similar environments, it's reasonable to assume that Carnufex carolinensis had a comparable diet. Therefore, we can imagine that the Carolina butcher spent its time hunting amphibians, small reptiles, and early mammals, which would have been abundant in the wetter parts of North Carolina during the Triassic. It's also possible that it competed with other predators, including large insects and even dinosaurs, for food. It's crazy to think that dinosaurs and Carnufex may have lived side by side, but it's true. In fact, Carnufex was one of the last genera of crurotarsans, which means it lived just before the Triassic-Jurassic extinction event that wiped out most large reptiles and paved the way for the dinosaurs to dominate. The Carnufex was a crucial part of the crocodilian evolutionary story. Their discovery helped scientists understand the transition from early crocodilians to the modern forms we know today. Before their discovery, this transition was poorly understood due to the lack of well-preserved crocodilian fossils. But the Carnufex filled a significant gap in the fossil record and provided valuable insights into the history of crocodilians. However, sadly, like many other prehistoric creatures, Carnufex went extinct during the Triassic-Jurassic extinction event. This mass extinction is believed to have been caused by massive volcanic eruptions in what is now the western United States and Canada. These eruptions led to widespread climate change and the release of large amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The resulting environmental changes caused the extinction of around 75% of all species on Earth, including Carnufex. In conclusion, the Carolina butcher holds an important place in the story of crocodilian evolution. Its discovery has helped scientists better understand the origins of modern crocodilians and the factors that contributed to their success. Although it went extinct during the Triassic-Jurassic extinction event, its legacy lives on in the form of the crocodilians that we know and love today. As always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoy what my team and I are doing, consider supporting us through the provided means. And never forget, the greatest super predators of the past are the ones that got away.